Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to welcome you to today's presentation conducted by my charming colleagues Nanor and Maria, and myself, just a sleek dude named Greg. Woo! Today's topic is going to be linked with the Bretton Woods system and organizations created under the aegis of it. The question we're going to attempt answering today is, how do the Bretton Woods Institutions address disparities in development? So, Maria, would you like to take over and tell us a little more on the introduction and what we're going to cover today specifically?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Greg. In today's presentation, we are going to discuss 1. Overview of Bretton Woods and the organizations included within. 2. How to define development. 3. Case studies. And 4. We will finally tie everything together in our conclusion. And to start us off, I would like to set the atmosphere with an original clip on how it all started.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference. Invited by President Roosevelt to the first major world financial meeting since the London Conference of 1933, they will work in the seclusion of this White Mountains resort.
Now that we've dipped our toes in the Bretton Woods Institution pond, I'll pass it over to Nanor, who will give an overview of the Bretton Woods Institutions. Nanor, off you go!
Thank you, Maria. So now we'll start with the overview of Bretton Woods and the organizations that lie within it. So first of all, there are 10 organizations within Bretton Woods, and they consist of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, World Trade Organization, the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and lastly, the Inter-American Development Bank. So they were set up at a meeting of 43 countries in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, USA in July 1944. Their aims were to help rebuild the shattered post-war economy and to promote international economic cooperation. The original Bretton Woods Agreement also included plans for an international trade organization, but these lay dormant until the World Trade Organization was created in the early 1990s. They were based on the ideas of a trio of key experts: U.S. Treasury Secretary Harry Morgenthau, his chief economic advisor, Harry Dexter White, and British economist John Maynard Keynes. They wanted to establish a post-war economic order based on notions of consensual decision-making and cooperation in the realm of trade and economic relations. It was felt by leaders of the Allied countries, particularly the U.S. and Britain, that a multilateral framework was needed to overcome the destabilizing effects of the previous global economic depression and trade battles. In his opening speech at the Bretton Woods Conference, Henry Morgenthau said the
bewilderment and bitterness
resulting from the depression became
the breeders of fascism and finally of war.
Proponents of the new institutions felt that global economic interaction was necessary to maintain international peace and security. The institutions would facilitate, in Morgenthau's words,
the creation of a dynamic world community in which the peoples of every nation will be able to realize their potentialities in peace.
Hence, the Bretton Woods institutions were created to ease the gaps in development between nations. The intent of the meeting was to speed economic progress everywhere, aid political stability, and foster peace. International trade would create jobs in all countries. Those jobs would provide income that would allow people everywhere to obtain adequate food, housing, medical care, and other amenities. Improving economic well-being was thus key to creating lasting world peace.
Woohoo! Liberalism!
Hey Nanor, that's great and all, but how on earth do you define development?
Economic development is
The cat is already in position. She literally sat here as soon as I sat down and jumped up on my lap. Didn't you, Katie, this morning? Hey, purring away. Can you hear the purring? Hang on. That's a bit quiet.
Whoa. Easy on that, Tiger. I guess, I'll have to take it over from here myself. For more than half a century, the most widely accepted measure of a country's economic progress has been changes in its gross domestic product, known as GDP. GDP is an estimate of market throughput adding together the value of all final goods and services that are produced and traded for money within a given period of time. It is typically measured by adding together a nation's personal consumption expenditures, such as payments by households for goods and services, government expenditures, i.e., public spending on provision of goods, services, infrastructure spending, debt payments. There are net exports, i.e., the value of countries' exports minus the value of imports, and net capital formation, the increase in value of a nation's total stock of monetarized capital goods. However, at the same time, we should not exclude the measurement of development in terms of welfare. In fact, such measurement highlights that development is a far more multidimensional term. Indicators of wealth, which reflect the quantity of resources available to a society, provide no information about the allocation of those resources. For example, it might miss out on more or less equitable distribution of income among social groups, could miss out information about the shares of resources used to provide free health and education services, and about the effects of production and consumption on people's environment. And thus, it is no wonder that countries with similar average incomes can differ substantially when it comes to people's quality of life, such as access to education and healthcare, employment opportunities, availability of clean air and safe drinking water, the threat of crime, and so on. As a matter of fact, recent United Nations documents emphasize human development measured by life expectancy, adult literacy, access to all 3 levels of education, as well as people's average income, which is a necessary condition of their freedom of choice. In a broader sense, the notion of human development incorporates all aspects of individuals' well-being, from their health status to their economic and political freedom. According to the Human Development Report published in 1996 by the United Nations Development Programme,
human development is the end and economic growth the mean to achieve it.
It is true that economic growth, by increasing a nation's total wealth, also enhances its potential for reducing poverty and solving other social problems. However, history offers a number of examples where economic growth was not followed by similar progress in human development. Instead, growth was achieved at the cost of greater inequality, higher unemployment, weakened democracy, loss of cultural identity, or a disastrous overconsumption of natural resources which could be needed for future generations to come. So as you can see here, development is an extremely vast term, which simply cannot be measured by plain economic successes or GDP rises. One has to take welfare into account in order to address problematic issues and global disparities. I know, it sounds all pretty complex, but let Maria and Nanor get into the case studies where they'll explore everything in details and we'll see how it's all done in practice.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. We'll take over from here. 4. Case study. Let's see how the organizations within Bretton Woods address the disparities in development. International Monetary Fund. An international organization working to maintain global financial stability through technical assistance, training and loans to member states. The IMF addresses disparities in development, trying to ensure stability in the international monetary system, the system of exchange rates and international payments that enables countries and their citizens to transact within each other. The IMF was conceived as a watchdog of the monetary exchange rate policies vital to the shared prosperity of the global community. It attempts to ease the disparities by surveillance, technical assistance, and lending. The IMF is often referred to as the financial crisis firefighter, called upon by member countries to help fight crippling sovereign debt and prevent contagion from spreading through the global financial system. Historically, the IMF is first and foremost an overseer of its members' monetary and exchange rate policies and guardian of the code of conduct. IMF is not a bank. It doesn't intermediate between investors and recipients, but it has at its disposal significant resources which come from a quota of subscriptions or membership fees. The IMF and the World Bank are twin intergovernmental pillars supporting the structure of the world's economic and financial order. Now that we discussed the IMF, Nanor will talk about the World Bank and how it addresses the disparities in development.
Thank you, Maria. And now we're going to go into the World Bank. So it is primarily a development institution. It finances economic development. Its first loans were to finance the reconstruction of the war-ravaged economies of Western Europe. But after a couple years, it turned its attention to assisting the world's poor developing nations. It promotes economic and social progress in developing countries by helping to raise productivity so that their people may live a better and fuller life. World Bank is an investment bank, which means they have investors and recipients, which means they borrow from one and give to the other. The World Bank exists to encourage poor countries to develop by providing them with the technical assistance and funding for projects and policies that will realize the country's economic potential. For a long time, they assisted with electric power and transportation projects. In making loans to developing countries, the bank does not compete with other sources of finance.
The African Development Group, also known as AFDB, is a multilateral development finance institution established to contribute to the economic development and social progress of African countries. Its mission is to fight poverty and improve the living conditions on the continent through promoting the investment of public and private capital in projects and programs that are likely to contribute to the economic and social development of the region. The overarching objective of the African Development Bank Group is to spur sustainable economic development and social progress in the regional member countries, thus contributing to poverty reduction. The bank group achieves this objective by mobilizing and allocating resources for investment, providing policy advice and technical assistance to support development efforts. Unlike the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank was modeled closely on the World Bank and has a similar weighted voting system where votes are distributed in proportion with the members' capital subscriptions. The Asian Development Bank, on the other hand, although it also attempts to reduce poverty, it does so by inclusive economic growth, environmentally sustainable growth, and regional integration. Ladies and gentlemen, there are remarkable differences between Southeast Asian and Sub-Saharan African countries with respect to economic, social, and governance indicators, and that's precisely why the Asian Development Bank and the African Development Bank address those issues in very different manners.
Next up, we are going to compare the International Finance Corporation with the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. To start off, I will start with the International Finance Corporation, also known as IFC, and that is an agency within the World Bank Group providing financial and technical assistance to the private sector in developing nations. It is legally and financially independent from any other branch, and it is the single largest source of direct financing for private sector projects. The IFC promotes growth of private sector in less developed member countries. It helps finance individual private enterprise projects that contribute to economic development of country or region, and it also provides advisory services and technical assistance to governments and businesses. In comparison, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, also known as MIGA, is a foreign direct investment in developing countries by providing non-commercial risk insurance to private sectors across border investors. It encourages foreign direct investment and it helps developing countries attract and retain private investment. In addition, MIGA guarantees protected investors against loss resulting from expropriation, breach of contract, war and civil disturbance, including insurrection, coups d'etats, revolution, sabotage, and terrorism. In addition to offering insurance to private companies, MIGA mobilizes additional guarantees for investors and assists host governments with legal services and strategic advice regarding investment. The next two organizations within Bretton Woods that we will discuss today are the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes and the World Trade Organization. The International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, also known as ICSID, is an autonomous international institution within the World Bank Group which seeks to remove impediments to the free international flow of private investment posed by non-commercial risks and the absence of specialized international methods for investment dispute settlement. ICSID is the world's leading institution devoted to international investment dispute settlement. It has an extensive experience in this field, having administered the majority of all international investment cases. States have agreed on ICSID as a forum for investor-state dispute settlements in most international investment treaties and in numerous investment laws and contracts. In comparison to the ICSID is the World Trade Organization, also known as WTO. And it is the only global international organization dealing with rules of trade between nations. Its goal is to help producers of goods and services, exporters and importers conduct business. It is a forum for governments to negotiate trade agreements and settle trade disputes. In addition, it monitors national trade policies, offers technical assistance and training for developing countries, and conducts economic research and collects and disseminates trade data. And finally, the last two organizations which we are going to discuss are the Inter-American Development Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The IADB, which is Inter-American Development Bank, works to improve lives in Latin America and the Caribbean. Through financial and technical support for countries working to reduce poverty and inequality, they help improve health and education and advance infrastructure. Their aim is to achieve development in a sustainable, climate-friendly way. Their goals are to reduce poverty and social inequalities, address the needs of small and vulnerable countries, foster development through the private sector, address climate change, renewable energy, and environmental sustainability, and finally, promoting regional cooperation and integration. And in comparison, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, also known as EBRD, is an international financial institution as well as a multilateral developmental investment bank who uses investment as a tool to build market economies. It was founded to support countries of the former Eastern Bloc in the process of establishing their private sectors. The EBRD offers project financing for banks, industries, and businesses for new ventures or existing companies. It works with publicly owned companies to support their privatization. The EBRD has promised to work only in countries that are committed to democratic principles. It promotes environmentally sound and sustainable development and does not finance defense-related activities, the tobacco industry, selected alcoholic products, substances banned by international law, and standalone gambling facilities.
Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, here we approach the les conclusions. And in order to sum up, the Bretton Woods Institutions attempt to ease the disparities all across the world in development through various different approaches. Either they go through indirect impacting on exchange rates, private and public financing, and trade agreements. It is difficult to say how efficient they are, as the metrics to measure development are extremely subjective. And the very last bit. We hope that everyone today enjoyed this little performance of ours. You guys have been absolutely awesome. It was a pleasure studying with you all those 8 weeks. On behalf of my brilliant colleagues Nanor and Maria, as well as myself, I would like to wish you all a brilliant summer holiday and all the best in future. Have fun, y'all. Bye-bye.